our public discussion regarding review of the city charter amendment, goodness, it's Monday morning after a Father's Day weekend. We're going to discuss our IPL uh, utilities model. Thank you for everyone for being here. This is a follow-up from a meeting that we had, about 40 days ago, 45 days ago. As we're continuing the conversation along to see what is the best practices and the best fit for independence. So on the agenda today, we have the review of the city charter amendment. This is going to be a presentation by our city manager, Zach Walker. Zach, I'll kick it off to you, and we'll flow from there.
Yes, sir. Mr. Mayor Pro Tem, if it would please the council, what I would suggest, I know these are listed in a different order, but our Director of Independence Power and Light, Joe Hagendeffer, has arranged to have 3 members affiliated with the city utilities of Springfield join today. I know previously the council had talked about perhaps traveling to Springfield and observing a meeting and having some discussion about those proceedings. Thought it might be a more efficient and better use of the council's time to just have folks join us using the advantages of modern technology. So if it would be okay, I would recommend that we engage in a Q&A with those individuals first. And I think that would be more beneficial than to informing your more specific discussion about what a potential charter amendment would look like in Independence.
Sounds good to me. Can we proceed without objection? Let's do so.
Okay, I'm going to ask Independence Power and Light Director Joe Hagendeffer to introduce who is on our call today. And then it would be my suggestion that those individuals give a little bit of background overview of their roles and experiences with city utilities, and then for the council to ask any and all questions you have of these folks who have generously given up their time today.
Thank you.
So, yeah, Joe Hagendeffer, Independence Power and Light Director. So with us on the Teams meeting, greatly appreciate all your guys' time. So we have Steve Edwards, who, and please correct me if I have positions wrong. I just was able to look up and talk with Dwayne Folk, who's the current CEO, President of City Utilities. So I believe Steve Edwards is the current Vice Chair of the Board of Public Utilities for City Utilities. And then we have Nancy Williams and Jennifer Wilson, who have both held previous chair positions of the Board of Utilities for City of Springfield. So thank you again for your time, and probably going to back away from the microphone here and let you guys each, in whatever order you guys want to, talk about your experiences on the board and kind of some pros and cons that you guys see with that structure of a utilities board, and then open it up to my city council and city leadership for any questions or follow-up that they may have. Steve, did you want to maybe possibly kick us off as the current vice chair of the board?
Yeah, you bet. So I'm Steve Edwards, and yeah, I'm vice chair. I've retired from Cox Health, which is a healthcare system in Springfield. And you were silenced for a moment. So did you ask a specific question? I want to make sure I heard you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Sorry, not to be a Verizon commercial here, but so we just kind of wanted to ask you guys for a general overview that you want to talk about, board structures, kind of how your charter is written and how you guys are formed, and some of, I think, each one of yours opinions of the positives and negatives with that board structure and things. So, you know, this City of Independence is contemplating changing our governance structure from right now. We're a council led city, and for all matters that are city driven, and we're looking at a different governance structure for the utilities specifically. And that is, I think, part of the discussion today is, does utilities mean electric utilities? Does utilities mean all city-owned utilities, as in water and wastewater? And kind of some of the positives and negatives you guys see with your structure down there in Springfield.
Okay. Well, yeah, that's helpful. I'll start, and know that Nancy and Jennifer will do a far better job than me, and they've got more experience and understand it better than I do. But I'll say that so Springfield City Utilities is a whole spectrum of services: power, water, waste, internet capabilities, etc. So it's a big responsibility and a very big budget. And the amount of time that the board puts in, I think, is appropriate, but might be overwhelming if our city council was put in that same role in terms of the detail of budgeting and understanding, the future changes we go through. The city council does approve all the positions, and so we are accountable to the city council. I often look at my role as, in many ways, a delegate to city council. The major decisions are still need to be approved by city council. So, for example, large capital purchases, the overall budget, other major changes are approved by the city. A great collaborative arrangement. And my knowledge, and I've been in Springfield since I was 2 weeks old, so I've got some good history overall. I just don't recall any big conflict between the way the utility board was governed and the city council. There may be others that have some history. I don't, but it's always worked very well. I think the sense of the fiduciary duty you have to be on a utility board is enormous. And the size of Springfield and the city government challenges, I think it would be it'd be very difficult to meet the expectations of fiduciary duty, I think, in trying to do all that work. So I like our model. I think it's proven effective for Springfield. Utility is very well regarded and has been successful. So I'm glad that we can all answer more specific questions. My overall impression is very positive. And my previous role being in kind of community leadership roles, we like how this works in Springfield. And so I'm an advocate for it.
I'll jump in here next alphabetically, I guess. This is Nancy Williams, and I was chair in 2023. I think that having the structure that we do in Springfield lends a lot of transparency and maybe even more community buy-in to the structure. Being able to tell your neighbor that you are on the board of city utilities, I think just brings it home that this is a city-owned municipal utility, that your neighbors are on the board. It's not just city council. It's a whole nother level of people that are going to bat for you, are, listening to everything that happens, everything that's proposed by the utility. I work for Habitat for Humanity for the local affiliate. I'm programs director. So knowing that there's a voice for low income folks on the board, if not the council, I think lends a lot of transparency. You're always explaining anyway the difference between a municipal owned utility and an investor owned utility. But I've really enjoyed this structure. I am not from here. I came here about 20 years ago from an area that was investor owned utilities, and just being able to explain the difference and the board setup here and how that just increases the voice that people have in their utility, I think is an incredible pro for this framework.
Okay, I am Jennifer Wilson, and I was the chair in 2022. And I'm not going to repeat what Steve and Nancy have said, but I will say we're a public entity, and like Nancy said, we're transparent. However, the city council become more political. There's a lot of political stances that are made there, and that really doesn't transition over to the utility. So by us being a separate entity, we can discuss things without necessarily getting pulled into overall city government politics. And then I agree with everything else that Nancy and Steve said.
Two other things I might add is, I think for a city council member, if your election cycle is coming up, having a utility board is a bit of a buffer as well. Not that the council's not accountable, but there is a buffer that helps, I think, council politically and other reasons. And I'd also add that, and Jennifer and Nancy are examples, our utility board, I think, is one of the most prominent boards in our city. And, university presidents and very prominent people that represent our community well. So their voice, when the city utilities board passes something, it's very well respected because the influence of those on the board and the credibility it has. So it's certainly, I'd make sure that your board, if you went that direction, would be comprised of very prominent people that can really represent the community well.
And along those lines, we've made a decision locally that our board is very diverse. So we have people different ages, different industries, different makeups, so that it is in addition to being community leaders, we're also people that represent the community as a whole.
So, Mr. Mayor, council, at this time, I think I would recommend free-flowing dialogue. If you've got specific questions for these past chairs, both maybe for their perspectives of how that board worked, its relation to the city and the city council, any other questions that would help you decide what you want your governance model to look like going forward, I think that would be apropos at this time.
Anyone want to fire away? Please proceed.
Thank you.
I'll kick it off. My name's Jared Fears, and I'm an at-large member of the council. I think my questions really are, so you talked about, I think you said that the council approved your board positions and large capital purchases. Did they approve anything else? Budget, rates, anything else?
Yes, budgets and rates, by example, are approved by the board as well.
Let me follow
By
up.
By council.
When you say large capital investments, can you be more specific?
Yeah, like in our budget, for example, we'll bring forward our large capital investments for the year, so those would be approved. So all the major capital goes through, but we're looking at new technology right now, gas turbines, for example. So that would be approved by the board and then the council. So there's thresholds you could set, but we put all of our capital items in the budget, so they actually have a chance to kind of have a say on anything.
And to follow up on your question about if it's approved, we have a bi-yearly, I think it's bi-yearly meeting that's joint between City Council Board and City Council Board. And in that meeting, we discuss, and it's public, it's a public meeting. And so in that meeting, we'll discuss big expenditures, budget and things like that. But is it once or twice, Steve? I think it's once.
It feels like we meet at least twice a year with the city council, but maybe the board approvals once.
Okay. So it's as far as the community is concerned, they have an opportunity to see the board and council at the same time, twice a year.
And on your board, a couple of questions relative to the makeup of the board. So you have specific, targets of kinds of people kinds of skill sets that you're looking for on the board, or are you, is it just whoever the council wants to appoint, or how does that work? And then I think secondly, connected to that, I think if I recall correctly, some of your board members don't have to live in the city. And so I'm interested in that piece as well.
So for that first piece, they all have to live within the service area for city utilities, but there is a certain number that live outside city limits, and that's, I believe, 2 maybe. And then the diversification, I'm not sure there's anything in writing, but if you look at the city utilities website, you can see the list of members of the board and where they work. So again, I think there's a diversity of nonprofits and corporations and, Missouri State President. So a wide variety of folks there. Beyond that, I think they do look at the nominations and the volunteers. You can go to the city website and fill out a form to volunteer to be on a board of your choice. And then those are vetted and there's an interview process. So I think through that whole process, they're looking for, younger faces to bring in. I'll just say it, people that are not just old and white like me. So, bringing in a diversity of voices throughout the community and people that their neighbors know will go to bat for them.
Okay, thank you. I think the other question I would just have is, given your current structure, is there anything that you would change about the board at this point?
I'll just say no. I think it's very effective to have a separate board, and it's locally, as Nancy said, it's very well. The city utilities is very well seen within the community, and it's city utilities specifically is just run very well. And I couldn't think of anything that I would change.
I agree with Jennifer, and I think a comment made earlier is worth exploring further, and that is that the city council goes through a very extensive interview process for the candidates. So it's not that the city utilities brings forward a candidate and it's rubber stamped. It's the whole city council's there. It can be a fairly strenuous set of questions to make sure they align in ideology and align in kind of principles. It also prevents maybe a dysfunctional board member coming forward that the city, would have problems with. And so it's a really good process. I like, and it's a privilege and honor to serve on it. And many people want to serve on it, despite our pay.
Anyone else, other questions?
I'll defer to other members and go from there.
Thank you. Thank you so much for coming today and giving us this insight. I appreciate it. My questions are what your thoughts are on how many board members you have and length of term.
Well, the length of term is you have 2 3-year appointments. So you're on it for 3 years, and then city council can choose to extend that appointment for another 3 years. Actually, I don't know how many board members there are. I should know, but I don't.
It's 11
11.
currently.
Okay.
And I think that's a good size. I think my experience being on lots of different boards that 3 or 4 might be too concentrated, and getting 15 or more gets so political it's less effective. So I sort of like the size of our board, and it's been a good size for other boards I've been on.
I like the length of the terms because there's so much to know and to learn, and the city utility staff is so good about training sessions and bringing forth information. But I think anything less than 3 years you'd just be still learning at that point. And so I think, the first year and 2, you're really learning a lot, drinking from the fire hose, and then being able to take on a second term, I think just lends a lot of historical knowledge to the board, and just, increases the knowledge and experience on the board. That's very important.
Anyone else, other questions? Please proceed.
Hi, thank you. I was just going to follow up on the board and the terms. And do you ever have a problem with attendance and ever maintaining a quorum? Like, is there ever a challenge with that?
I sure
No,
don't recall ever having a problem getting quorum.
As Steve said, it's because of the people that are on the board themselves. Everybody is very professional. It's a prestigious board, and people show up.
Okay, thank you.
Please proceed.
Thank you. I'm going to come back to that question of large capital investments. So often the utility is making purchases, but they are replacement pieces. They are, transformers that are expensive. Do you consider those large capital investments, or that's just the cost of doing business, as opposed to we are investing in a new AMI system? We are adding a combustion turbine, so that changes the nature of our work. I'm just trying to understand basic work versus change in work.
I mean, I think it's fair to say that we have a budgeted capital amount that the expectation is for routine capital replacement. And so the board doesn't sit down and make a decision on every transformer, but it's included in the budget. So here's the amount of money we have based on historical trends, et cetera. And then I might say when we talk about big projects like gas turbines, it just doesn't show up to the city council on an agenda item and they have to say yes or no. That's when we have the pre-meeting. We talk to them. There's a time for them to really evaluate, have questions. So I would say I don't think it slows us down, but I think the process is deliberative enough that we just get really good support, real good questions. And so I think if you're worried about capital being maybe too intensive in terms of overview, I don't see that's the case. But at any point, the city council can weigh in on the overall capital budget and then maybe drill into it further if they wanted to.
So it sounds like during your bi-yearly council combined board meeting is when you sort of make those deliberative investments, and then that comes to a council meeting immediately after that, or 3 months later when all the questions have been answered, or what's your sequencing?
So they would start floating things like rate adjustments or large capital improvements years before we actually do them. And so that actually helps not only with the council, but also helps with the public because you can, you can start getting people acclimated that those things are going to occur. To give you a frame of reference about capital improvements, I was on the board for 5 years because I filled in the last year of another person's position. I think I voted maybe a handful of times on a capital improvement project. The majority of the expenditures that went through the utility were not voted on. They were in that fund that Steve is referring to. One of the ones we voted on was we did a citywide fiber. That was something we voted on. Or we switched over from gas to from coal to natural gas. That's something we voted on. But the majority of the expenditures were just lumped into a line item that we discussed at a board meeting. But anyway, to answer your question, yes, we used that meeting as a way to make something public, but it would be several years in the making before something occurred.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is the things they vote on are things that are policy decisions that have a price tag attached to them. You're not voting on all the mechanics of how to run the business of the utility. Okay, that helps me. Thank you. Since all three of you have been in leadership positions, I assume that the vice chair will eventually become the chair. Are you rolling over every year, every 2 years? What is your sequence?
That's our sequence. So it's typical the vice chair would ascend to chair, and so that gives you and you're often an officer before you become vice chair. And so you've got that year of development as an officer, and then as vice chair, there's a year, and then you would likely ascend to be chair, and then you're chair for a year.
Okay, thank you.
There are also, if I can add a little bit to that too, there's also a committee structure. So you've generally been a chair of one of the several committees before you're an officer of the board itself. So that's very helpful. Oh, I had something else, but I forgot it. So go ahead.
So with your committee structure and your board meetings, can you tell me how often you meet?
So it would be twice a month. So the board meeting, and I don't remember the schedule. I've been gone long enough that I don't remember, but the committees will meet a week or two ahead of that and kind of hash out some of the details to then bring as recommendations to the board. I remember the other thing I was going to mention too is that we kind of got out of sync for a few years and did not have the outgoing chair on the board for that additional year as past chair. And that happened with Jennifer and I, and that was, if you can avoid that situation and definitely have the chair that's rolling off of the position still be on the board as past chair for a year, that's very helpful.
Can you tell me what committees you have?
I'm going to lean on Steve for that one.
Great, thanks. So we have let's see if I'm right on this. I can look it up, but we have essentially a finance committee and a management committee, management and operations. So that would go through, major operational policy changes, et cetera. And then the finance and budget essentially is that focus. I think that's correct. It's done in such an efficient way. So what we do today, we'll have the committee meetings on a Tuesday. The board meeting will be a Thursday a week later. The committee meetings, all board members attend the committee meetings. So there'd be 11 people. And so the committee meetings just fall in succession. So let's say it starts at 3:30 and maybe the management committee's first, all attend. Only the voting members would vote. And then when that committee's over, we go right into the next committee, the same members. So all the board hears all the committee information. So it really keeps us on board. And I think it's helpful too, because when we go to the board meeting, it's televised and the whole community can do it. And so it gives us time to really align our thinking and kind of avoid provocative meetings that could be kind of divisive. We can work through those issues in that committee meeting. And so I like that approach, especially we've not had this, but I just think of the controversy that's maybe nearly impaired certain boards and city councils, et cetera, because of the divisiveness of opinion. This helps us work through that.
Does the CEO report to you or to the city council or to the city manager?
I think technically they report to the board, because we're the ones that do we do a yearly review, and we're the ones that also make a recommendation on their compensation. And so the CEO does the reviews and the compensation packages of the balance of staff and city utilities, but our board is the one that does the compensation and review of their work.
And from, I was going to say, from a practical perspective, we just did have a transition of CEO from retirement, and we kept the mayor very informed. The city manager actually is a member of the board. They're a non-voting member, but so they attend every meeting, and we're a city management style government. But when we're choosing the CEO, we did talk to the mayor beforehand, and here's where we're leaning. And so it was very collaborative to make sure that we didn't bring someone forward that maybe undermined the mayor and council's agenda.
And so the CEO is an employee of the board or is still an employee of the city with city protections and?
I think it's right to say we might need a lawyer here to make sure we understand our own board, but he's an employee of city utilities and therefore an employee of the board. But I believe the city can have a voice in the selection. So could not unreasonably withhold, but would have a voice.
Do you find it that the electric utility sucks up all the air in the room and then there's like a little, oh yeah, and by the way, we have water and sewer?
Seems pretty balanced to me. I'll let the others answer.
Okay.
So we have gas, electric, water, and transportation. We actually don't have sewer. That's a city provided. And I think we're the only public utility in the United States that runs transportation. We have the bus service under our purview. And yes, we make the majority of our money off of the electric. But the only one that runs at a loss is the transportation. Gas and water are self-sufficient themselves. But no, we see, at least when I was on the board, we saw all four equally. So even though we were running the transportation as a loss, they had an equal voice to what we talked about with electric.
Thank you very much.
Anyone else? Go ahead.
A couple of follow-up questions. You said city manager was ex officio non-voting member. Are there any other people who are ex officio non-voting?
I don't believe so. I don't know if we would consider the CEO ex officio. He's certainly a voting member.
Okay. And then back to your comments. I think I caught this, but I want to double check on budget and rates, and all of that works its way up from the committee to the whole board and then gets sent from the whole, and you all then vote on it. And then after that, it gets sent on to the city council, anything that needs to.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is that even before we vote on it, I think we have a joint session, so there's no surprises. So it's something that maybe the utility board is generally supportive of, but we've not approved yet. And then we will have that joint meeting. And so it doesn't take legs out from the board. I think they still have a chance to voice if they want to go a different direction. But yeah, your general sequence is correct. It goes through committees, it goes to the board, and it goes to the city council.
Okay, and make sure my notes are right. You had two committees, finance and budget, and then management and operations. Does that sound right?
I'm going to try to look it up because I'm not sure I
Thank you.
remember the names of them.
All right, that's all I have. Thanks.
The reason he's looking it up is because even though we have individual committees, all of the board attends all the committee meetings. So we have the smaller committees for voting, but it's a little, we don't necessarily operate as individual committees, even though we have them set up that way.
I guess I'm kind of trying to understand if everybody attends all the committee meetings, what's the purpose of the committees?
Well, I think
You're
a
good.
factor is that the city council, or not the city council, the CU meeting is televised, and there's not as much room for discussion, and especially on complicated issues. And so I think that's one factor. I'm not sure everyone would agree with me, but I see that as a benefit. We really get aligned and understand, and can ask tough questions without embarrassing people. Another element is, we all come from different industries, and this is very complicated stuff. And I sure like the idea of hearing almost every topic at least twice, just to really acclimate myself to the complicated issues.
And the committee meeting is a public meeting. It's just not televised. So it isn't like we're doing something behind closed doors. It's anybody can attend, and it has a posted agenda like any other public meeting. But to Steve's point, we can really dive in on the, the board meeting itself is scheduled, I think, for an hour and a half. Well, we may dive into a couple of topics. The committee meeting will take up an entire hour just among them. And if we did that at the board meeting, you'd be extending the length of that board meeting as well.
Jennifer, thanks. That's an important distinction. I think from my experience, and it's probably because things are going well right now, it's very rare if ever anyone from the public shows up to the committee meetings, but they're welcome and invited.
I've thought about one more thing that we didn't talk about in the beginning, but city utilities and as Steve pointed out, city utilities and the city of Springfield work hand in hand. And there isn't a board in town that's prominent that doesn't have some person from city utilities on that board. So city utilities is ingrained in the community just like the city of Springfield. And therefore, you don't have the concerns you might have about the utility going rogue. Because, like, for instance, I served on the Springfield Business Development Corporation Board, and that's where you bring businesses in the community. Well, the city utilities always has the CEO on that board. So they're as integrated. And by the way, also the city manager is always on that board. But city utilities it isn't like we have this organizations kind of running independently. It's just as ingrained in the community as the city of Springfield.
Anyone else? Other questions? Joe, please proceed.
I have a question. So you're starting from scratch and drafting some city charter language. How much of what you guys do is specified in that, and how much is policy and how much is practice, right? So the boards and commissions and the differences between those two and how work flows up, is that spelled out pretty in detail in your city charter, or has that just been learned practices through the years as you guys have developed?
I mean, I'll give it a shot. I think it's pretty well described in city charter. We have our general counsel meeting helping us, make sure that we're in line with that. So if you're drawing it up from scratch, I would definitely look at how the charter's been incorporated to include it.
Anyone else? Other questions?
So back to your terms, you said you're elected for a 3-year, or appointed, for a 3-year term, and you can choose to put your name in for a second 3-year term, and then you're termed out? Okay. Can you sit out a year and come back?
I think you can.
Okay. Thank you.
I'm pretty sure that is a possibility. But
We love
nobody
our
ever does
utility, but
because there's
6
so many
years.
people that want to
Yeah.
line up and get on the Board of Public Utilities. So it's, I don't think anybody did come back during my 6 years.
So the city utilities also has a second board, which is kind of like the Friends of City Utilities. And I'm sorry, I interrupted somebody. Anyway, it has I don't know what it's called, but it's basically the Friends of City Utilities. And it's intended to be a board to help bridge the communication between the board and the community. And a lot of that board is made up of former city utilities board members.
Anyone else? Please proceed.
Thank you, Mayor. So does the city council bring the candidates forward for consideration to the board? And then the board makes the final consideration who would serve with you?
I think it's the other way around, if I'm correct, where the people can apply to be on the board. Just so no one really brings them forward other than they can apply. I think there's a process where they may be narrowed down, but then it's voted on by the city council. Now, I think in practice, it's very common that the general manager or CEO is speaking with the mayor and might say, hey, we really have a weakness on the finance side, or we have, a discrepancy here, or hey, this person who is applying, we just want you to know that here's their history. They failed to pay their bill and they've got a grudge or something like that. So there's communication going back and forth. And I think the CEO has some informal influence in the process, but it's still the final decision of the city council.
So how does, trying to get a good feel of the dynamics, does your council and then your board kind of stay in your own lanes, but come together for cooperative discussions and agreement? Do you see any kind of bleed over in roles?
I don't think so. I don't see that. None of us want to get involved in city council business, by example. That's tough work. We don't want that.
Well, it's definitely unique. Try to be the board of directors for a utility on top of that. It can get a little dicey at times, for sure.
Yes.
Some of your opening comments about not having to deal with that, I envy you. We spend a lot of time as a city council trying to understand and learn just the ins and outs of a utility, and trying to understand how that industry can change at a whim, as you guys know, to stay up on top of that. So it's certainly challenging. Public hearings, how do you handle that at your board meetings?
So there's a time at every board meeting that allows the community to come and talk. And I think at the time I was on board, that was limited to 3 minutes per discussion. But honestly, unless there's a rate increase that's being discussed, we rarely have the public wants to attend our meetings. As Steve said, they're televised and they have the ability to come speak, but we're pretty boring. So we just didn't really have a lot of people that came and spoke, unless, of course, there's a rate increase or a large capital improvement.
Do you get a lot of emails or any kind of community discussions about why this or why that?
No. And I think our utility, we've been very fortunate to have a succession of leaders since the 70s of just having excellent CEOs and excellent culture. And so there's not been, a really provocative issue that's brought the public to the meetings. Even rate adjustments, the ability to communicate and inform the community is so good that the community knows what's going on. It's in the newspapers. It's very well communicated. So we just haven't had that. I mean, I knock on wood, there could be some kind of controversy that could develop, but we don't get, individual emails from someone saying, hey, my power's out and the city's not being fair. Occasionally that could happen, but it's shockingly quiet, but it's not because City Utilities doesn't reach out and open people up for comment. They just, right now, things are going pretty well and we just don't have it.
Well, congratulations.
think a few things that came up early on. Sierra Club came and talked to us about coal several times back in 2019, 2020. People occasionally come to talk about the transit system, which has undergone an overhaul recently in terms of routes. But so people kind of pick and choose what they want to come talk to us about because we do so many different aspects of the community.
Your board is certainly unique if you throw in the transportation side to that. We were going through our budget, and we've had those conversations over the months about how to handle our transit situation, and it can be very complicated and delicate for sure. Economic development, how is the board position itself to help with economic development where appropriate? For big ticket items, not your local mom and pops, but for your big energy users, is there a policy or is there a direction that the board likes to use to help facilitate itself?
I mean, I think that's one of the most important roles the board has in coordination with city utilities is with the city council. You know, what is our philosophy on growth? We know that growth can be inhibited or advanced due to what the utilities can play in that. So there's actually a position, a VP over economic development in the utility. That person is so well thought of that when Springfield's chamber lost their VP of economic development, which is a driver in our region, they asked to borrow the city utility economic development person. So a really good relationship and really well thought of, and they work hand in glove. It's really helped our growth. So many times the city and the utility go sideways because incentives aren't aligned. And I think that's part of maybe one of the questions I was asked when I was anticipating the possibility of being on the board was, thoughts on growth. And we're kind of a growth-minded region, and we've got a lot of fast-growing suburbs around us. And we want to make sure that we don't become a donut hole. So Springfield's been very growth-oriented.
That's pretty helpful. The independence, I think we're beginning to see our growth spurt take place. So getting our thoughts in line with what economic development needs to be with an appropriate alignment with our utilities is certainly the thoughts that are on our minds just to keep the growth going.
Anyone else, other comments?
Mr. Mayor,
Please proceed.
you mentioned earlier you had 11 members of your board. Then you also mentioned the city manager is a non-voting member. So how many actual voting members do you have?
I guess the 11 board members are all voting members.
Okay, so how many non-voting members do you have in addition to that?
I think it's just the city manager.
Just the city manager. Okay, that's all I had. Thank you.
Please proceed.
So you talked about you had a chairman, vice chairman, but then you also said you had officers. What are the other officers you have?
Oops. The committee chairs are who I'm referencing. And then I guess there's also a secretary of the board as well. So
I think so.
Yeah.
Is there a treasurer, or is that treasury function just lie with the utilities?
I think it lies in the utility. But if there's specific questions like that, and we've got a board that we can't remember the details, you can have your CEO send them to Springfield City Utilities, and we get the actual answer for sure. But that's what I understand it.
And there is the finance committee that is directly overseeing some of that as well.
Yeah, and there's a chair of that, so that's probably the closest thing to a treasurer then.
Anyone else have further questions? Please proceed.
So you've said that 11 was perfect. We are considering 7 and thinking about the way that you've got your functions divided with committees, with vice chair, chair, past chair, and a secretary. I'm just thinking 7 might be tight. Do you think you could do what you do with 9 and still have the diversity of thought? Or you think that 11 brings you the diversity of representation as well as skill set?
I'll try to answer and lean on the others to weigh in. I feel 7 is kind of tight, especially if you have committees. And so then you might have quorum problems more easily. Although I will say that what we'll do, because everyone attends both committee meetings, if we do have a quorum problem, someone from another committee or the whole committee is anointed. So we can manage it a little better that way. But 7 would seem kind of tight. Also, I have a philosophy of be careful about a concentration board where 1 or 2 people can really change a direction. And I think that number's above 7, but I think 9 and 11, I don't know if I can make a strong distinction between the difference in terms of effectiveness. We like what we're used to, but I think if we said it's going to be moved down to 9, I don't know, in my opinion, that would really affect us.
Can people attend virtually?
No.
No.
I think they've attended the committee meetings virtually, but I think as far as the board meetings, you have to be in attendance. So actually kind of tagging on what Steve was talking about, what's nice about the diversity of our board, it is really hard for one person to just dominate the board. And I don't know if that's because of the size of the board or the makeup, but in the 6 years I served on the board, there was never one personality that dictated what happened on the board. It was, so anyway, I don't know if the sweet spot is the 11 people or the way they've chosen the people on the board, but it's a very respectful board. And there'll be varying opinions on things. So we've had, conflict. I mean, all boards have conflict, but it's always done in a way that's respectful and professional. And anyway, I don't know if that's reflective of the size of the board or not.
And when you talked about your board makeup, you said, go and look at where everybody works. So it sounds as though everybody who's on this board is still currently working. It's not retired people or community volunteers who are not employed?
No, it's both. Like I can tell you, I'll do it really fast. You want to hear? So we've got an executive at Bass Pro Shops. We have someone from Habitat for Humanity. We have someone from Economic Development. We have a former CU vice president from about 15 years ago that came back. We have a management consultant. We have a banking expert, 2 banking people in a row. A young attorney, a young CPA, and a retired university president. And then I'm retired as well. Do some consulting.
Thank you very much.
Anyone else other questions? I have a couple of questions about your financial performance, if I could. And I looked over your financial reports that you gave probably about a year ago, and I was impressed with them. And so do you, as a board, hire the auditor that overlooks the financial performance of the financials for the utilities? And then how did you come to the financial reports that you report, and how do they come about? What was kind of the process of that?
So the utility CFO makes a recommendation for who will conduct the audit. I mean, I think, so Steve, correct me wrong, but I think the contract for the audit will be in place for several years. It's not just a one-off audit. And, but they make the recommendation of who does that audit. They also make the recommendation of what will be included in that audit, and then the board votes on that, and then they conduct the audit, and then we review it. So we as a board did not go find the auditor. However, we are part of determining what will be audited and who will conduct that audit.
And the internal auditor also has a reporting function to the board as well directly.
So is it the same auditor that does the audit for the city itself, or is it 2 different auditors, one for the utility and one for the city of itself?
2 different.
Okay. And then your financial reports that you've got are pretty robust. How did you develop those? And they probably developed over time. And how did you get to that?
I mean, Nancy and Jennifer are part of that, and probably 30 years before. I do think it's an accumulation of what the board was needing and expecting, a little bit of the culture of the organization. I know that this year, last 2 years, there's a little bit of a movement that the board felt like we are getting a budget without as much say in actual policy changes, things that require more time. And so that changed our budgets a little bit to make it move forward, so we have more time. And we have a planning retreat where those items can be discussed in great detail before the budget happens. So I think the board feels very engaged and very involved, but also we don't want to fall asleep at the wheel. So if there are major decisions being made, we don't want to see them for the first time at a board, budget meeting. We want to see them in advance in a planning process.
And can you give me a couple examples of that?
Well, so long-term planning is, what's our future power supply? Do we look at nuclear power? Do we look at more gas turbines, for example? So we've often looked at long-term. As we've moved, we did shut down. There's two big coal plants. We shut one down. I don't know, Jennifer, is that maybe in your window of time?
It was in our window of time, yes.
Yeah. And those moved more to gas turbines. So those decisions were made in a very strategic, thoughtful way. Also, maybe another example is bonds. And so looking at bond and capital planning, looking at the age of our plant and looking at our facilities and what they're going to look like in 10, 20, 30 years. So that's the sort of stuff that I think very effective CU leadership has brought us involved in that process, really for years. So we really understand where we're headed and we're on the same page.
So as I was leaving the board, one of the things that was starting to be discussed was buying a larger water share 50 years from now. So we were not only just planning for the current utilities, but we were making plans for the community 50 years down the road. So those were things that none of the board, actually, most of us probably won't even be alive for when that water is brought on, but we are making decisions now to affect 50 years in the future.
Thank you. Anyone else have further questions? Please proceed.
Maybe I should know this, but I don't, but this is for Joe. Excuse me. Does Independence serve residents outside the city for IPL?
We have a very small number of what we call border customers, where we have meters on houses that are served by Evergy, and vice versa. We have a few residents that are metered by Evergy that happen to be off of a distribution line for us, but they're very few, like 100 or so. So it's a very small number of what we consider border customers, but I wouldn't consider them like the city utilities where their service territory truly extends beyond the city limits. I think they're kind of different things, if that makes sense.
Do they have voting power in Independence? Do you know?
No, most of them are in the Sugar Creek area.
Okay.
So I would say no.
So with you have 9 in the city board members and 2 outside the city board members, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
And I think that's generally proportionate.
Okay.
And that brings up an interesting question, because you've got the water and everything. Is everything in your service area the same map? Or do you have a different map for your water, different map for your utility?
We have
Because I think
a
that's
different
really the
map.
question that the council member is getting to.
A different map for each service.
Okay. And so then how do you address the board concerns with different maps in different areas?
That's a good question. I'm not sure. So I'm an example of someone that's outside of the city. And I have my water not from the city, but I have my electricity from the city. Electricity might be the bigger driver, but I'm not sure the answer to that question.
I believe if they have any service from city utilities, then they're eligible to be the county member on the board.
That's just an interesting question for us, because we serve Lee Summit for the water, Blue Springs for the water, if I'm correct. And if we combined all of this together, it'd be an interesting question on who could serve on that. Go ahead.
But just for clarity,
Mhm.
those are bulk purchases. Those
Mhm.
aren't directly, we sell our water to them, but we don't maintain it. We don't have meters, correct?
We would just have the master meter going into the city, and we
Okay.
don't fully support necessarily other cities. Lee Summit also purchases from Kansas City. But yes, our map on water is different from our map on sewer, is different from IPL.
Just an interesting question to consider as you go through the process. So perfect, thank you. Anyone else, other further questions? Mr. City Manager, any comments and also from Joe, anything before we wrap up, unless there's other questions?
I think we were good, Mayor. We just wanted to give the council that opportunity to ask questions of these folks who have kindly given an hour of their time today, who've served on the front lines of this board. So if you don't mind, on behalf of you and your colleagues, I'll thank these individuals for giving their time to us today.
Enjoyed it. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
So Steve, Nancy, and Jennifer, if you want to watch some sausage making, that's fine. But you're also free to get back to your lives.
Bye, guys. Thank you.
And you can go ahead and frame how you would like to see the questions or things that you need from us regarding the rest of this morning.
So Mayor, I passed out, this was emailed to the council ahead of time, but also physical copies are available today. And we're going to ask our tech support to also pull this up on the screen so that individuals who view this meeting later can see the document that you're discussing. If it would be your pleasure, I'm happy to give a high-level overview of this. It may be helpful as we go through this for the council just to insert your thoughts along the way, because I know you just got a lot of information from those individuals, but if we go section by section, I can show you what's been done or what's kind of been compiled, and then the council can insert their comments thereafter as we go through it.
Yep, absolutely. And anyone else have their thoughts before we move on? Okay, thank
Okay.
you. Please proceed.
So this document begins with the deletion of sections 3.12 through sections 3.18 of the current Independent City Charter. Those are the sections that specifically spell out, well, at the time when the charter was adopted was just the existence of an electric utility. The city did not own and operate any other utilities at that time. And then those other sections in there are the establishment of the Public Utility Advisory Board. Those are deleted in favor of adding what would be new sections 3.12 to sections 3.30. Largely what I have done here, I would say 90 to 95% of this is mimicking what comes from the city of Springfield's charter regarding their city utilities. Where it deviates is based on the feedback that I heard from the council at your last roundtable on this topic. And certainly, additional time to contemplate discussion today may mean those sentiments have changed, but I tried to capture what I heard at that last meeting. So this is where I'll kind of start to go through those sections, and please interrupt as we go through this. So section 3.12 would define what public utilities are. It would recognize that as of today, the city has electric, water, and sewer systems. It also contemplates that there may be other utilities that are added throughout time, whether through direct acquisition, change in state statute, etc. Where we start to deviate from Springfield would come into section 3.13. In the Springfield Charter, governance of public utilities is for all of those city utilities that you just heard about. What I heard at the last discussion was we wanted to segregate this, have this Board of Public Utilities oversee our electric utility, and the City Council retain direct oversight and management of the water and sewer utilities. So section 1 of that, subsection 1, that sets out that is controlled and operated by a board, which would be known as the Board of Public Utilities, and then water and sewer would be controlled and operated by the City of Independence. Section 3.14 goes into this discussion of the Board of Public Utilities. That's, last time, what I heard at that meeting was 7 individuals. Proposed in this version of 4-year terms, and then no more than 2 consecutive 4-year terms.
So can we have discussion as we go, or
That's-
do you want to wait?
No, that
until
would
the-
be my suggestion, that we workshop this as we go through it.
Thank you. I'm still really wrestling with the idea of divorcing water and sewer from electric. And here's my struggle. Because I can talk out of both sides of my mouth on this. Obviously, if you set it up so that the CEO reports directly to the board, which we did not ask them, is their director of the public utility the director of all of them or just of their electric utility? Because they spoke of it as though it was just electric.
So they have a general manager, CEO of city utilities. Under that, you have executive vice presidents over each of the separated
Okay.
utilities. So you have kind of a transit system, and then each functioning of a utility, you'll have a finance department, so there's a CFO per se and a chief operating officer, and then you have each of the utilities have executive leadership underneath that general manager.
So that's a little more complicated than I think we need to be. But the other reason for thinking of them as a blended utility is you have shared right-of-way, you have shared services, you have a central garage that's shared. So I struggle with splitting the electric off completely from water and sewer. I mean, I'm up for discussion, but I just want you to know I'm still wrestling with how that works in its complexity, because there's both things that are very unique and things that are shared. So I don't have a great conviction on how that should be done. So just sharing that. And since we're on the terms, I think we need 9 people on this board. And I know Joe's like, Bridget, we're gonna have issues with attendance. I do think people should be able to attend remotely. So that's my thought.
Mr. Mayor.
Please proceed.
So I've been thinking about this since our last meeting. I also think we need 9 members, and I think at least 7 of them should be residents of the city, and the other 2 can be non-residents. I also wouldn't have a huge objection to the city manager being part of it as a non-voting member. As far as the terms, I've actually liked the idea of an odd number of years, so maybe even 3 or 5 instead of the 4 years. And then as far as whether or not we keep the electric utility and the other utilities together, I don't really have a strong opinion either way, but I would kind of go on the side that we actually do keep them together. So anyway, that's all I have. Thank you.
Can I just talk real quickly? This is not this is just how, so my recommendation landed at 4 years was so that you don't ever have an election cycle of a city leadership aligning with a board position coming open. So not saying that it would, but any even optics of that being used as a political sense to, I will load the board up with people that I have, removes that, right? And it's between election cycles. If you use it at 3 years, you will land on election cycles, or 5, right? Eventually. That was the only thought process. Good, bad, leave it, take it. Just, that's kind of the thought process of why I landed there on that one.
So,
Please proceed.
oh, go ahead, John.
Look, Councilman Stewart, just for point of clarification, are you suggesting like 7 residents? Can they be part of a professional group within that residence requirement that you're suggesting? Help me just flesh that out a little bit.
I mean, I don't think we've really got to the qualifications yet. So right now I'm just saying 7 residents and then 2 people that do not live in the city to make all 9. We haven't really got to the qualifications point yet.
Okay. Fair enough.
So I too have kind of wrestled with the idea of it being just the electric utility versus all the utilities. I think that where I'm currently at, and I'm kind of conflicted on this as well, is that, you know, we operate currently certainly very unlike Springfield from a standpoint of we have our electric utility and we have water and sewer are completely, you know, and they're embedded within municipal services, which, you know, takes it into streets and other, you know, other functions. And so I guess I wonder if we're creating a problem if we combine all of the three of those, all the utilities under one, essentially in one area. But not saying that it can't be done. I'm just kind of wanting us to think through that really well, because I'm not, you know, just because we do it now doesn't mean we have to do it that way. But on the other hand, it would, they are very different functions of from a utility standpoint, I think.
Councilmember Vought?
So I'm not even sure how I want to ask this, or are these staggered terms? Was that?
We do not have that spelled out in this proposed charter language.
Okay, and how would the council go about appointing? I know there's an application process. I mean, do we all seven appoint each person, or?
Yeah, so let me quickly just carry you down through 3.15 because all of, no, this is
that
good.
coming?
All of this, well, it's all part of what you're talking about. So, you know, I think what I've heard is, you know, right now it's listed as 5 members of the board being Independence residents. If we go to 9, I heard, you know, make that 7. We included having 2 members, and we use the term may in case there was, you know, opposition to this idea, but having 2 of those individual members of the board be people who represent businesses that are subscribers of the electric utility, but maybe they don't live in the community. So by head count, your residential customer base is your largest, but there are many private, commercial, and industrial businesses. Think about North Point, think about Centerpoint Hospital or Cargo Largo, Burden Fletcher, many like that who have CEOs who are large in our top 10 consumers of electricity, but that don't live here, but certainly are a very important part monetarily of our utilities. So I think giving them some representation, that was the basis of the recommendation there. And then to Councilmember Vaught's last point, and then let me retract again. The recommendation set up in 3.15 is that these members of the board would be nominated and appointed by majority vote of the council acting as a whole. So when I first came to, you know, this is not spelled out for the Public Utility Advisory Board. When I was first hired at the city, that is the process that was done. We got into some years where there were differing opinions about who should be on the utility board, and then we went to a model where each council member got an individual appointment. This would, put into city charter that would be done as a committee as a whole. But I'll jump back for more discussion.
Anybody else? Please proceed.
So, I didn't speak to the number of board members, and let me do that. So I'm kind of inclined to agree with the idea of 9, 7 being, you know, citizens of Independence and the other 2 not, or potentially not at least. I'm kind of inclined to think that we do a 3-year term with kind of similar to what Springfield does on every, you know, you can serve two times, but then if you, then you term out, you could lay off and then come back. I think that would be okay. But, you know, the idea of the concern about the election cycle, you know, I guess if the inclination is to make this political, it's gonna not matter whether it's election cycle or not too much, I don't think. It could, I suppose, but I don't think it would. I do like the idea of the board itself. I mean, we would have to compile the initial board, but I do like the idea of the board itself recommending members to the council, and then we interview them, as opposed to the council just dreaming up. I mean, initially, we'd have to do the first one, but after that, let them do the work on, so they kind of know what they need in the board, and then make recommendations to the council, and we can then interview, and you know, we can even put in there if we wanted to, you know, for every vacancy, they need to recommend 2 positions, 2 people, or something to that effect. But those are just my current thoughts.
Please proceed.
Thank you. To keep the ratio the same, I would recommend 3 of the members may live outside the city. If they are business owners or business leaders, that keeps the same ratio when we were 2 to 5 versus 3 to 6. If we increase the size of the board to 9. I'll tell you that when I came onto the PUAB, I got interviewed by 3 council members, and it was really good because it forced me to really understand what they were looking for. I got to ask them questions about expectations, and I think it set the stage for a higher functioning board than one person says, yeah, my neighbor's great at golf, and let's let him sit on the utility board. The questions that I had to answer were also more specific to the utility. Now, it may be, I'm trying to think, that may not have been the actual application. Those may have been more related to the questions that I was asked in the interview. So, you know, they asked, like, what's my background? Can I read a financial? Have I seen organizational function? Did I understand bonding and making long-term strategic investments? So I had some fantastic questions. So I really hope we think of a robust interview process, and I'll be interested in what questions they ask on their applications, kind of how many applications do they get. I would assume that if we had people, they would just have to come through the regular application process, just like they do now. And obviously the initial board, we're gonna have to set them up for staggered terms. And having done this, think of one person doing a 7-year term so that you have whoever you think your highest functioning person is has 1 year to be that past chair so that you get your continuity going on that first board.
Mr. Mayor,
Please proceed.
so this is just a thought I came up with. Should we consider like that each city council district like has to be represented by at least 1 member? Like, so like all the members don't come from the 1st district, I mean, or the 3rd or whatever, just because there's different demographics, you know, in each district. It's just an idea that I think we should consider that.
Please proceed.
Back to, does IPL, water, and sewer are under the same body? I guess I would kind of throw my question to Lisa and Joe. I mean, what's your quick thoughts on that?
Sure. I mean, to be honest, I hate to be totally neutral, but there's pros and cons with each. And and I think there's gonna be things that you can gain from one model that may be hindered from the other. And I'll be honest, I'm gonna be completely probably agnostic and neutral on that one. I think there's pros and cons with each direction. I personally, as the electric director, don't have a preference for one way or another. And that's just
Again, flexible either way. But I will say that, and DKMT made the recommendation that be power only. That's kind of where that originally came from.
Sure.
I will say that IPL has some complexities that water and sewer don't necessarily have. They have market issues to look at. They're a member of SPP, which adds a whole layer that water and sewer don't have. We are simply city utilities. We don't participate in any conglomerate organization like they do. So in that way, we are very different. Springfield does operate their sanitary sewer utility separately. That is a city function in their environmental services group. So even Springfield doesn't have them all three of those together. So it's really just approach. Also, when you're looking at overall budgets and things like that, IPL obviously a much larger budget than water or sewer, probably even combined. No, absolutely more than water and sewer combined. So just them buying a single piece of equipment is our main replacement plan for a year, right? So very different financial considerations there. Again, like Joe, I'm personally flexible either way. I just think it's a matter of, which direction you feel comfortable going. And then again, as far as service areas, we in water and sewer probably have more back and forth with a greater number of customers than IPL does, just because they have such defined service areas where we are annexing, de-annexing, wholesaling, and things like that, that IPL doesn't necessarily do the same function.
So would it be, so if we go with the utility model being IPL specific, then the water sewer will still be oversight and still be looked through with the PUAB.
That was the plan following the last roundtable to discuss this, but again, flexible.
Is there a reason that we couldn't start with electric, and as we work out our kinks and figure out how that system works, if we look at it over time and are like, this doesn't make any sense, we're gonna need to add water or water and sewer back in? I mean, I think we may be able to learn our hard lessons with one utility instead of with adding the multi-layered complexity. So that's one thought. I do appreciate that water and sewer, since everything you do is underground, is combined with streets. I think you guys have been much more efficient and thoughtful because you're doing shared planning. Are you concerned at all that if IPL has a separate board and that perhaps changes their wage schedule or anything else, that has influence on the water sewer side?
To be perfectly honest, IPL has always had a different wage scale, and that's an issue we've dealt with since the dawn of time. It is a grossly different industry in that realm, and that has been an issue that we already deal with and would continue to be the same. I would almost say that them being governed by a separate entity would almost help in that, because at that point the board is setting that, and it's more very specific to that market, and it might calm some of that, just because as it stands today, I'm a city employee and you're a city employee, and why are our salaries so grossly different? A specific example would be Central Garage versus IPL's garage. Very, very different wages for a mechanic in one shop versus a mechanic in the other. So, and those, to be honest, are issues that we won't, with current budget issues that we have, that's not something that there's a way to fix. So a different governance structure and looking at that very specifically may help.
What happens if the utility board says, we want to pull legal inside, we want to pull HR inside, we want to pull IT inside because they make the most sense, and that is our recommendation? Obviously, the city in part can support those functions because the utility is a part of paying for them. So maybe this is a problem for another day.
So, Councilmember, the way I have this drafted, and you'll see later, is the city council still approving the budget for the electric utility. So that's going to give you the power of the purse to decide which of those functions you will and will not fund. You know, if you decide you want to allow the electric utility to go it alone on some of that stuff, you could, but all that would be done through budgetary allocation. The other thing I wanted to add was to your question about, you know, do we give this a trial run with the electric utility and then maybe consider the others later? I think that's absolutely possible to do. I think what the council should consider is, do you give yourself the ability to do that, or a future council the ability to do that down the road by saying in charter language that the council could add other utilities later, or do you leave it alone to have a future public vote on that?
Yeah, I had exactly that thought relative to, you know, pros and cons of, you know, allowing a future council to say, we're gonna pull, you know, sewer under the Board of Public Utilities, or water under them, leave sewer out, or whatever. I'm not sure, but I guess my thought being is that if it could be written in such a way that there was flexibility for that going down the road, but not that that would be the current intention. I know there's pros and cons both ways of that, so I'm just thinking out loud.
Anyone else, other questions or? Please proceed, Mr. City Manager,
Okay.
with you. What do you think the next section should be?
Yep, so then 3.16 is the organization of the board, as you heard with the former chair people from Springfield. This would set up a chairperson, a vice chairperson, a secretary, which in the Springfield charter, it says the city clerk could serve as secretary. I think that makes some sense. But notably, note that in Springfield and as proposed here, each of those positions would be for a term of 1 year. So you're always, you know, every 12 months getting to rotate that through each of those board members. Let me make sure I keep my screen up with our conversation.
Do we like the idea of the city clerk being able to serve as secretary? I'm not sure that I do, but, I mean, I think she has enough other city functions that I'm not sure that serving as secretary of that board is one additional thing, but on the other hand, maybe it does flow through. I'm just thinking out loud, wondering what others think.
I don't think she'll have enough time, honestly.
Thank you. It looks like on the Springfield website, they have a chair, vice chair, secretary, and assistant secretary.
Yeah, and I was just sidebarring with Mr. Hagendeffer. Right now, his administrative assistant is serving as the clerk to that Public Utility Advisory Board, which is often the case with many of our boards and commissions. We have a staff liaison who takes minutes, organizes meetings, et cetera.
Please proceed.
Can the board chair be reelected? So you're elected to a 1-year term. Could they be reelected once? Sometimes you have an exceptionally effective chair, although it sounds as though it works really well for them to rotate the chair, because then you have shared suffering and people are better to the other board members when they have to be chair later.
As written, there's nothing that would prohibit the same individual from being reelected. Again, notably, the other thing I wanted to point out, as you flip to page 5 of 9, partway down through that paragraph, all members of the board shall serve without any compensation, though if in the course of business, you know, they've got some expenses, meeting expenses, whatever it may be, those would be covered by the, in this case, electric utility. Restrictions on the board, this was again lifted straight from the Springfield Charter, but the board in all respects to be completely nonpartisan. So specifically that would mean that while you're on the board, nobody who is a board member can be a candidate for office, hold any other office, be a member of a party's committee or other party organization. And if somebody were to find themselves in that status, they would be considered to have immediately resigned as a member of the board. And then the last part of 3.17 says that if you were a board member and then you wanted to go to work for the electric utility, there'd be a 1-year freeze out before you could enter employment with the electric utility. Pretty standard language. Again, this was copied straight from Springfield, but 3.18 duties, largely language that talks about, oversight of the electric utility. Don't mean to glaze over that, but it's just pretty standard. A little bit more interesting, 3.19 powers. Specifically, that calls out responsibility for hiring of the general manager and providing for the term of his or her compensation during their tenure as general manager. The responsibility for purchasing operating supplies and equipment, providing for the extension and improvement of property, to enter into contracts with other public and private utilities, and the general all things needed for the successful operation of said utilities.
One thought there, should we include the annual review of the director? I mean, that.
Yes.
Like that. might
Yes,
be a good thing to
highly
do.
recommend. Okay. 3.19, this is exact copy and paste of Independent's current charter language on budget, because I wanted to ensure that consideration of the electric utilities budget aligns up exactly with consideration of all other departments' operating and capital budgets. So this just puts into charter that they're going to be doing all the same timelines, processes, et cetera, so that council gets to consider their budget at the same time you're considering all other departments' budgets. The disbursement language is just, again, giving the electric utility the authority and responsibility for disbursement of funds. It actually puts that into the hands of a comptroller of the electric utility, which again was part of the DKMT recommendation, and Joe's taken steps, already having hired a financial manager and other financial staff at the utility. I do want to note 3.21 funds. Again, all monies due and collected by the electric utility are managed by that comptroller but deposited in a city depository. So again, we're setting this entity up separate, but there are some advantages of using the city's economies of scale, so like banking, having that combined bank account. So still taking advantage of that. 3.22, I'm sorry.
Follow up on that one. So, I mean, we would want the right now, utility billing is all, for all the utilities is under Power and Light. We'd want that to continue. So do we need to make any statement? Probably not. And I was just thinking in the charter part, we probably don't need to put anything in there. There wouldn't be any limitation that the city couldn't utilize Power and Light.
And probably not in the charter, but I definitely think you're going to want to do some sort of a contract for services memorandum of understanding. So it's spelled out what those duties and responsibilities are, and then the financial cost to those other utilities relative to the electric utility. I think that's a good thought. 3.22.
Can we go back to 3.21?
Of course.
Can you please explain the second paragraph to me in a way that's easy to understand?
Essentially, it's saying that this comptroller, the way this is written is that you're going to hire a comptroller and you're going to follow the city's hiring processes to appoint that person, and then that if they have any costs relative to their job, like a bond to cover their liabilities, those will be paid for from the electric utility as well.
Okay, that needs to be more clear, because if I'm reading this, I'm thinking about them issuing bonds or paying bonds, and I understand you're talking about a liability bond, so a little clarity there will keep us from having questions we don't want to have to struggle with.
Thank you. Three point 22 just says that the Board of Public Utility is going to follow accounting best practices, spells out, Joe inserted some which I thought was a good addition, some of the entities that have different accounting standards, but references and makes clear that we're going to follow those industry best practices. Again, as we've discussed today, there are some really industry-specific standards for the electric utility, and that carries over into the realm of accounting. So this recognizes that, but also holds that utility to the standard that they will be following those, and then provides some provisions about how frequently those reports will be made available, and also gives the council the ability to request as they feel may be necessary, those records, so that those can be open for examination.
Can we also ask that annually that audit be presented to Audit and Finance? Just some ways to keep the utility still tied to the city, just from a reporting standpoint.
Yep, just make a note of that.
And I'm gonna go back to 3.21 for just a second. The way that reads is the controller, the second paragraph, said controller shall be appointed in such a manner as the Board of Public Utilities shall direct. I think we want the director to be able to hire that person, not have the board appoint that person in that way.
I agree. Let me write clearer language. What I intended there is, so more broadly, again, this electric utility being set up as a standalone entity, envisioned that, you know, they will have their policies, procedures, et cetera, that very well may reflect the exact same policies and procedures as the other city departments, but that, you know, the board's going to approve those like the council approves those. But let me clarify that to make clear that we want to follow our current model for other departments where the general manager has that hiring authority. Okay. 323 discusses purchasing and contracts. A couple of important highlights here. The third line down mentions following competitive bidding in accordance with our rules and regulations as the board may establish. But I also want to note that those also have to be approved by council. Personally, I envision those that will follow the city's competitive procurement policies, but just want to make clear that they're to do that. Also want to note in paragraph 2 that we want this electric utility, even though in many regards it's, you know, operating somewhat independent from the city, there is still that tethering to the city, and we want to take advantage of the combined purchasing power of the city as a whole when it's practicable, because that's going to benefit both taxpayers and ratepayers if we can get leverage and purchase in bulk in a way that's more financially feasible. .324 is the rate-making provisions. As you heard from the group there, you know, the board, like currently happens with the PUAB today, review that, make recommendations, but ultimately establishment of the rate schedule belongs to the city council. This does spell out, using the Springfield language, some language about how that process goes about, particularly with regard for opportunities for public review and public comment. So, you know, don't want to read this to you, but there is some specific language there about, making sure there's ample opportunity for public review and public input before the council were to take action, consideration of a change to the rate schedule. 325, employees of the public utility. This just goes into specific language that the board has that direct line of supervision and is responsible for the management of the general manager. All the other employees in the electric utility would be reporting to the general manager. Again, talks in here about establishing rules for hiring, firing, promotion, demotion, et cetera, but two important considerations. One, I largely see that following the city's current personnel policies, as well as our adherence to the collectively bargained agreement with IBEW Local 53 for our represented employees. 326 is payment into treasury and services furnished. Specifically, here an important note of two things. It establishes in the charter the 9.08% of gross operating revenue that is paid from the electric utility to the city as a payment in lieu of taxes. The other important consideration, this is Springfield language, and this is, I want to make sure the council sees this because this is quite a deviation from the City of Independence's current practice. It says, in addition to such payments, the public utility shall furnish without charge adequate lighting for all streets, alleys, or public ways deemed necessary by the council to be lighted, and may, without charge, at the request of the council, furnish electricity, water, and sewer service to all city-owned buildings and grounds as needed on the same conditions other than payment under which such services are available to private users. So right now, the city has adopted a municipal rate for our facilities. In Springfield, they have the ability to waive that, and then it shall provide at no cost those public areas like streets, alleys, public ways. So that is a major deviation from the current Independence practice. That's Springfield language, and I wanted to make sure you see that and have opportunity to contemplate and discuss that.
So that is not just the cost of electricity to our streetlights, but actually maintaining them and paying for the equipment is at the cost of the utility. Okay, so right now, where are those costs borne?
So today IPL does do the maintenance work and then all of the departments pay. It's part of the internal services, a transfer out of all of the utilities, the other utilities and the general fund departments. So lights in the police lot are covered by police. Municipal services has a transfer out for roadway lighting. Water, sewer, satellite locations pay for theirs to transfer out to IPL.
I know Columbia, same thing, the utility covers the cost of their lights. Is that the norm for municipally owned utilities? Do we know?
Joe may know better than I would. In the area, obviously you have to look at Columbia and Springfield to have a comparison. So in the state, it appears to be the norm. Nationwide, I would defer to Joe.
I don't know nationwide. I just kind of know specifics of how some different utilities operate. So yeah, city utilities of Springfield does not charge for city buildings or street lights that do not generate revenue. But if there's a revenue generating facility, if you had an ice skating park that generated its own revenue, then they do pay a municipal rate.
I'm familiar with some other, again, this is very Missouri specific, but some municipalities and other parts of the state that aren't charging themselves for water, for example, for their municipal pool or their spray grounds. So things that are operated by the city, broad terms, there's seems to be a more common practice of waiving those expenses.
What does that do to your budget?
So without getting daggers thrown at me, so city utilities, their pilot is very low, if you look at that. But if you added all the freebies, I guess, if you want to call them, their pilot is actually very equivalent to ours. So they actually reduce those expenses out of their annual pilot. So does that make sense? So if all the municipal buildings and streetlights were $1 million a year, I would take that 9.08% and actually reduce it $1 million, and that's how so it's a lower percentage. That's why city utilities, if you look at their annual report, that's how they calculate their pilot.
But it's still going to cost shift to you regardless, because if you're paying for lights at the police and at the parks, et cetera, I mean, you have hard costs that are coming with that for the street lights and installation, et cetera, because they're paying you to do those things now. That's what I'm asking, like, is this going to clobber you?
I haven't calculated all the numbers yet, so I'd have
Okay.
to dig into a financial analysis on that.
Okay, before we make choices like that, we need to know what the
But
fiscal
do
impact
you
is.
understand what I'm saying though? So if I pay the city $1 million and they departmental transfer back to me to pay for streetlights,
Right.
it's a net neutral if I didn't pay that. And
I'm just asking, what does that bottom line look like?
Yeah,
With
I'd have to do an
transfer one
analysis on
direction and the other.
And in addition to that, my comment in this particular section would be, I'd be a little hesitant to put that 9.08%, which seems like a completely random number to me, in a, I mean, 0.08, why that? You know, put that in the charter. I mean, that just seems a little bad to put that, you know, not enough foresight to be able to limit that. So and I agree with Bridget's comments relative to, I think we need to have actual numbers or impact on, you know, or at least a good estimate, I should say, maybe not actual numbers. I know that might be hard to get, but, you know, on the movement of internal services and kind of how that works.
Yeah, let us do some calculations on that and give you guys more quantitative data so you can better understand that. It's okay to advance. 3.27 talks about the disposition of net income. This is if there were identified revenues over expenses on an annual basis. This defines, you know, all of the usual and proper costs of the operation, all the things that have to be paid out, et cetera. But then it goes on to say that the Board of Public Utilities should make a recommendation to the council about what should be done with net revenues. The council would vote on that. If the council were to not approve the recommendation of the Board of Public Utilities, then there would be a joint session of the board and council and would require a 2/3 vote to approve what to do with that net revenue. There are restrictions on what the net revenue could be used for. That would include adding it to a reserve fund for emergencies, to add or extend or make improvements to the electric utilities facilities, and by facilities I mean things like transmission lines, substations, you know, things like that. Not getting Joe, new mirror for his office. The improvement or service in any department of such public utility or a reduction in rates. Make it very clear, though, that in no case shall any part of this fund be transferred to the general revenues of the city. So
paying down debt is not one of the options.
okay.
Where it says what reserves can be used for the following purposes.
clean up some of that language as well. Good suggestion. Make sure I'm keeping up with the slides here. Okay. 328, this is just adding very specific language into the charter that public utilities, which again, remember the very first section of this defined public utilities as all three, electric, water, and sewer. Public utilities could not be sold unless there were a vote of the public, either for or against the sale of the utility. So just some additional guardrails that don't currently aren't as clearly called out in the current city charter. Gives the board the power of condemnation, so the council will recall, you'll have ordinances from time to time if Joe's adding a new substation or running a new power line, where we give them authorizing eminent domain proceedings as necessary. This is extending that authority to the board as necessary if they're looking to expand the existing infrastructure of the utility. And then area of service, tried to give us a little latitude here, so it makes very clear that they're responsible for the electric utility services within the corporate limits of the city. But also, let's say there were a situation where Evergy wanted to give us some territory that they currently operate. I don't ever see that happening, but this makes clear that if we were able to expand the service territory outside of the corporate limits, that we would have the ability and power to do so.
Put the word accepting in there. You can purchase, lease, erect, install, or accept real personal property that's contributed or donated.
Yeah, we'll add or accept to that list of ways that we may come to acquire property. Okay. Mayor, that completes the review.
Very good. That is a lot. Anyone else, any other final comments or wrap up?
Just-
Joe, since, well, go ahead, Councilmember.
Just one thing, so, I think rightly so, excuse me, rightly so, we're pulling out the language relative to, that's been a problematic for the utility in the past, relative to the whole idea of operating in a business-like manner and all of that. I think that's right. Do we need to add any language to allow the utility or utilities to be able to operate for benefit of economic development? And I don't know that we do with this scenario, but I guess I'm asking that from a practical standpoint, because I think there's been an expectation, or at least among this council, there's been discussion relative to being able to utilize it in that fashion.
I'm going to tell you, my recommendation is yes, to make that clear, so that it's not subject to interpretation and debate later. To me, among the benefits of a municipally owned and operated utility is the ability to pursue development that results in a larger customer base, because the more customers in the service territory, the more you're able to spread fiscal impact of rates out over a larger pool of customers. So I think that's just any business investing in itself, looking to raise revenue and control the growth of expenditures. So I'll look to add some additional language for the council to consider that would make that a very clear responsibility and duty and power of this board.
Anyone else, other final thoughts?
Mr. Mayor, as we're moving forward, are we, the consideration to put this on a ballot? Do we have any kind of thoughts, timeframes, public comment for discussions, obviously, before we go to a ballot measure? Any spitball timeline?
Yeah, let me kind of start high level and then zone in on that. I would recommend here in the next 30 to 45 days, that the council have a roundtable that is more broad. There's some lingering issues out there that in my conversations with each of you, I think the council needs to start to come to some consensus. Do we want to take those charter questions that didn't pass the last time and that 3 of the 4 lost by an average margin of 122 votes? Do we want to revisit that? Are there any components of the issues that didn't pass in the general obligation bond that you want to bring back forward? Are there other projects with untapped revenue streams that you want to pursue? So we need to kind of start identifying yes or no on those questions and then mapping out timelines of election cycles, both in terms of when it makes sense to bring things forward, that you give yourself enough thought to work with your constituents to have those conversations, but also, again, taking advantage of economies of scale and, putting things on a ballot to where you're not paying 6 figures for an election every time there's a cycle. Specifically for this, if the council is able to wrap this particular conversation up in relatively short order, then if you're able to take action by the end of this August, you're able to put this on the ballot as soon as this November. So that would probably be the very first opportunity you would have to bring this issue forward. You're limited on what you can put on a February ballot by state statute. You're also looking at a primary election for council. You're looking at a general election for council next April. So you just want to start to think about what else is on the ballot and what kind of noise are you trying to cut through to have this issue considered on its merits.
To follow up with what you just said, before the general obligation bond was put on the ballot, there was a good year worth of work and community discussion with the Chamber of Commerce and the community partners. Are we anticipating that deep of a community conversation with them? Certainly we should bring them aboard to let them know the thoughts and ideas that we're having. We do have a new individual starting next month, Valerie, who's going to be coming in pretty hot and getting her feet under herself regarding the chamber. So I don't want to get too much on the plate, but these are very significant issues that we have to have a high level, full functioning idea from the council and from our community partners.
So while the new CEO is obviously going to be, not coming on board for about 30 more days, this issue specifically has been on every chamber legislative agenda that I can remember since I was hired in 2012 of, improvement around the operations and efficiency and cost of Independence Power and Light. So I don't think this issue is new. I don't want to speak for the chamber or their public policy committee, but I think this would be largely appreciated and supported, though you would want to, obviously take it to them and discuss that and understand. But I don't think you're plowing new earth and would require the level of education of a general obligation bond, which was obviously relatively new concept to our community.
So I think what I would like to hope we could do is, I think we need to coalesce around this idea of whether it's Power and Light versus all 3 utilities. We need to kind of get some agreement among ourselves on that. And then we need to get some agreement on the number of people in terms. And then I think I would like to see us take it to, in 2 or 3 different, sessions to the community, and so that we can get some feedback from the community on it. And study session would be one possibility, but I think there's some other venues that need to happen as well.
To add to that, I'm perfectly fine with IPL as its alone, then have the 2 other entities by themselves as a start. I think we have the language in there, so unless there's objection there, I think that could get checked off the list today. 9, I'm okay with 9. I think that's a good number, a good representation. I would like to see Certainly, the citizens represented as they should, since they bear the cost for most of all of the things. I don't necessarily agree with each of the council districts. I think strong representation from the business community, obviously some of the residents there, but this is going to be, not to sound bad here, but this is going to be an extremely high-functioning board. As I believe Nancy was saying, that she was on the board of Habitat for Humanity, which also represents some of the lower economically diverse areas of our city. And so I think there are room to have everyone represented. So those are my thoughts on that. If we could get some of that checked off before we leave here, I think that just helps the conversations move faster and further.
Yeah, I love your question with regards to, I don't see any objection to 9. Are we around that? And then I don't see any objection with just going with IPL by itself. Yeah, are we pretty well set with that with regards to Councilmember Fear's question? I think those are two important questions to establish going forward. Go ahead.
And I think if we can write it in write the language in such a way that we, there's a way to add the other utilities later if we determine, or some future council determines it's appropriate. I think that's good. I think we need some language relative to the terms, and so 9 sounds like there's agreement there. I think the question then is, are they 3-year terms? Are they 4-year terms? And how do we stagger those? I think, we need to maybe have some more discussion about that.
3-year terms sound okay. Is there objection to that? So there's another one checked off the list. Now I'll leave it up to the other folks for staggering.
Can we, I know you want distinctions between who lives here and who works here, but can we just write the language that everyone who is on the utility must live, work, or own land or a business in the city of Independence? Because they're all committed to the success of town, whether they live here or they have their financial resources here. I think it solves the same issue.
I think we need a specific number that have to be residents. And I would go with the 6 that you mentioned earlier.
So 3 that could be from outside and 6 that have to be residents? Okay.
Please.
I'm just going to add to the conversation that I think we're in agreement that this should just be IPL. So then we need to add back the language for the PUAB and have a discussion on now what that's going to look like.
And one thing that's missing in there is clarity that the public has the right to come and speak before the utility board. I don't think that was called out for a section on public input. I think that's important.
And it might be interesting to look to see if that was part of their rules as a body, or if that was actually in the charter, where that public input is.
I'll follow up with Springfield on that and
Just see where it was at.
give the council
Yeah, an
report
option.
on that. Yep.
Anyone else other thoughts? I think those are important questions, so Councilmember Fears, thank you for those questions. Those were good. Anyone else?
Timeline, what should we expect and when?
If it would please the council, what I would recommend is we go back and make these changes, certainly circulate that to the body. But then publicly review this and discuss it at your July 14th study session. With our council rules being as they are, we can add this document to that agenda that would come out several weeks in advance of that meeting, so the public would have a chance to review and digest this as well. But we could have a public dialogue at the 14th. I would maybe call that kind of, final cleanup markup of this language, and then just start to have a more targeted conversation about how and when the council wants to bring this forward for public consideration.
Okay. Does that work with everybody? Yep, good job, yes, very good. Anyone else? And Joe, anything else from your thoughts of anything we need to consider before we wrap up?
No, I just want to say I do appreciate the council's ability to continue this conversation and meet and come to some kind of consensus, which is really important, right? And then communicating it outward. So I just appreciate the efforts and the time.
Thank you. We appreciate your effort and time. As Mr. City Manager, well done. And anything else as we wrap up that you think need to be stated or thought of before we wrap up?
I would echo Councilmember McCandless. Good job. Thank you for the robust conversation.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. And with that, we'll just call this meeting adjourned.